Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be looking at the PvP gear for the three classes that wear cloth, being the Warlock, Mage, and Priest. I'm going to be looking at the blue and the epic set and comparing them between the three classes. I find it pretty interesting that they actually are pretty different in their stat distribution. Particularly between, I think the point of comparison between Warlock and Mage is pretty interesting because unlike Priest, they don't have a healing role, right? They're only caster DPS. Whereas the Priest set, I think Blizzard was trying to make attractive for both DPS and healers. So the stat distribution is a little bit different in that they have like more MP5 and stuff. But with that said, we're going to be looking at all three. But I think the point of comparison between Warlock and Mage is going to be the focus of this video, just because they're the DPS casters, right? So, just starting with the Warlock, the full set gives you 458 armor, 110 stamina, 81 int, 125 spell power, and 2% crit. And then if you upgrade to the epic gear, you gain about 300 armor, about 50 stamina, about 20 int, 60 spell power, but you do lose that 2% crit. The most valuable piece of the blue set being the helm and shoulders, because those are the two pieces that give you crit. A lot of warlocks will wear that in PvE, that two piece, just to maintain that 23 spell damage bonus. But with that said, those are the values, but let's look at the next class. So for the Mage, the blue set gives you 778 armor, 96 stam, 83 int, 20 spirit, 111 spell power, 4% crit, and 1% hit. And then if you upgrade to the epic gear, you gain about 100 armor, about 50 stamina, about 10 int, 20 spirit, about 60 spell power. You lose 1% crit, but then you gain 10 spell penetration. And then finally for the Priest, blue set being 708 armor, 101 stam, 80 int, 114 spell power, and 24 MP5. That was kind of what I was mentioning, where the Priest set doesn't have any hit or crit or anything. They're giving you MP5 instead because they want it to be attractive for healers. Plus, Shadow Priests don't really value hit or crit anyways, just because their only spell that can crit is really Mind Blast, and they have plenty of hit with their talents. But moving to the epic set, you gain about 200 armor, about 50 stamina, about 50 intellect actually, 50 spell power, and you do lose 12 MP5. So that is just the stat breakdown, right? But now let's get into the interesting stuff where we're actually comparing them. So starting with the blue gear, since this channel is focused on Warlock, that's going to be the point of comparison. So I just made this quick spreadsheet showing all the values for everything from armor down to MP5. And then I compared Warlock and Mage, and then Warlock and Priest. So starting with Warlock and Mage, this is what the title of the video is kind of alluding to. The Mage gear is just way better than the Warlock gear for some unknown reason. So let's look at the difference. So Warlock versus Mage. Using Warlock as the baseline, let's see what happens when we compare it to the Mage gear. So you lose 320 armor. You gain 14 stam if you're a Warlock, right? You lose 3 spirit. Or 3 intellect, sorry. We lose 20 spirit. We gain 14 spell power. And we lose 2% crit and 2% hit. So the only thing that Warlock is ahead of Mage in is 14 stam, 14 spell power, but we lose all of this. The most valuable thing being that 2% hit and 2% crit is huge. And it's also unusual to me that the armor for the blue Warlock gear is so much lower than like Mage and Priest. Those are in the 700s, this is in the 400s. I don't really know what that's about, but that sucks for Warlocks. And then looking at the priest, we lose 250 armor, we gain 9 stamina, we gain 1 intellect, we gain 11 spell power, and 2% crit, and lose that 24 MP5. So I would say that the warlock gear for a warlock is actually definitely better than the priest gear. It's better itemized because you're just really using armor and MP5 and gaining these other stats, right? Like crit and spell power. But if you look at the warlock and the mage gear, it's just no comparison. The warlock gear is way worse than the mage gear. I mean, 2% crit and 2% hit difference is huge. I'm not an expert on mage, but it's my understanding that unless you're like full bis, a lot of mages will wear 2-piece blue PvP like into Nax or like well into AQ40. It's just a very good 2-piece for mage because they have so many items that have like crit and hit, and the warlock does not. But then let's see, does it change at all? Does it get any better for the warlock when we move to the epic gear? And the answer is a little bit, but still kind of the same story. So looking at warlock versus mage, using warlock as a baseline, you lose 120 armor, you gain 6 stam, you gain 8 intellect, you lose 38 spirit, you gain 13 spell power, and you lose 3% crit and 1% hit and 10 spell pen. So certainly the mage gear is still quite a bit better. Still a 4% difference of hit and crit. With the blue gear it was 2 and 2, and with the epic gear it's 3 crit and 1 hit. 4% total difference. Which is certainly not worth 13 spell power and like 6 stam 8 int. And you're losing, you don't get any spirit, and you're losing armor and spell pen. It's just the mage gear is just way better. I mean, if I could wear the mage gear as a warlock, I would, because it's just way better. And then the priest, we lose 160 armor. Stamina is the same actually. We lose 25 int. We gain 13 spell power, and we lose that 12 MP5. So with the blue gear, I would say that these values right here, the warlock versus priest, I would say that the warlock gear is actually better. But for the epic gear, no, I would certainly rather wear the priest gear. That 160 armor, 25 int, and 12 MP5 is certainly more valuable than 13 spell power. So with the epic gear, mage gear way better, priest gear also better. And I just thought that was interesting when I was kind of looking at my epic gear. I was like, man, this doesn't have any let's take a look at it. Armor, stam, and spell power. There's no crit, no hit, nothing like that. It's just not a very attractive set. And let's also talk about comparing it to tier 2, because unless you're going for rank 14 for the weapon, which I recommend you do, but if you're like, I just don't feel like doing rank 14 for the weapon and I just want to like PvP for fun or whatever, and I would say don't even go past rank 10 or 11 then, just because this rank 12 and 13 gear isn't even really much better than like tier 2. And it's certainly worse than tier 2.5. But let's take a look at it. So this is the 6 pieces of tier 2 that correspond with the 6 pieces of epic PvP gear. So for the epic PvP gear, it's the same thing. 738 armor, 154 stam, 103 int, and 182 spell power. But then for tier 2, with all this gear, you end up getting 550 armor, 132 stam, 93 int, 30 spirit, 164 spell power, 2% crit, 12 health per 5, and 20 shadow resistance, 10 frost, 40 fire, 10 arcane, and 10 nature resistance. So let's kind of look at it again with like a Excel sheet, right? So I have the PvP gear and the tier 2, looking at the values. If you were to wear your tier 2 instead of the epic PvP gear, what value changes is there. So going for tier 2, you lose 188 armor, you lose 22 stam, 10 intellect, and 18 spell power, but you gain 30 spirit, 2% crit, which is the big one, 12 health per 5, and then 20, 30, 70, 80, 90 resistance split up amongst the different schools, right? So I would say, like, if you're looking at this right here, for overall PvP, the PvP gear is better. I would say that in most circumstances, this 188 armor, 22 stam, and 10 int, and 18 spell power outweighs the crit, spirit, health per 5, and resistances. But they're not that far off, truly. I mean, these negative values compared to these positive values, I would say it's not a huge difference. Maybe for like Soul Link Warlock, where you really just like want stam and int and armor and stuff, you don't really value crit super highly. But if you're playing like a Destruction Warlock or a SM Ruin, crit's a pretty nice PvP stat. And honestly, the tier 2 gear, not a whole lot worse than the PvP gear. So unless you want rank 14 for the weapon, which actually my last video on the channel was talking about the rank 14 weapon, how good it is. If you just want to be able to PvP just casually and don't want to be bothered ranking to 14, just wear tier 2, honestly. Tier 2, and you can get like rank 10 or 11 for the mount if you want. And then you'll also get just going for rank 10 or 11, you get your 2-piece, the blue gear, for PvE purposes as well. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, mostly looking at the comparison between Warlock and Mage and just how much better the Mage gear is. I don't really know what Blizzard was thinking when they decided that 14 stam, 14 spell power for the Warlock is worth 320 armor, 3 and 20 spirit, 2% crit, and 2% hit for Mage. It's just, the math is not mathing for me. It just doesn't add up. I don't understand why the Mage gear is so overtuned, but it is. So, sucks to be a Warlock. Wear tier 2 if you want. But yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for watching.